I think around about 1991, 92, Robert Mapplethorpe had an exhibition in London. And like all of us, we were very concerned about Mapplethorpe's nudes and the potential for exploitation, particularly of the black male subject. There was a kind of consensus in the room that, Mapplethorpe was doing something wrong. And what was being denied actually in the space was the kind of aesthetic beauty in the work. So it was seen very didactically, and one academic, again it was Professor Stuart Hall, confessed to actually enjoying looking at the black penis in Mapplethorpe's work, and it was a game changer. All of a sudden, everybody recognized that it might just be okay to say that there is a pleasure, whether gay or straight, in looking at that space. I think the relationship to photography and fantasy is very real, okay? So, but of course, the relationship to the media construction of a certain type is also very real. In many ways, kind of culturally, we need those stereotypes as a kind of anchor. So it enables us to kind of to feel comfortable with who we think we are across race, across space, across gender, across age, across notions of kind of innocence, across notions of kind of violence. And I think some types seem to fit more comfortably within the location of those ideas of who, I suppose, society or media prevalence of what they want you or I to kind of conform to. I mean, for me, the vital question is, what is the work we want photographs to do? And the location and the placing of them means that something else can happen with them and they can perform lots of different tasks. So the same image can do a multitude of different things depending on the context of which it sits in. So in many ways there's no correct reading, but there are dominant readings. So to kind of intervene with that, to kind of subvert that space, is also part of the work that you can do curatorially, so that you can relocate its meaning, so that it can have a different outcome, if you like. The Human Rights, Human Wrong project, essentially was an invitation to work into an archive to extract a different set of concerns. What I was trying to do within the Human Rights, Human Wrongs project was to look at time. In one ways we look at the 60s, for example, and we think the American Civil Rights Movement. But at the same time, the 60s is also the moment in time where we have the Organization of African Unity and other key political kind of like moments that get shut out of the story. And people forget what's happening simultaneously within those kind of visual moments. So when you bring them all together, somehow people look at the kind of context of what's important in history as very different. They think, okay, the Civil Rights Movement in America, it's a fantastic moment, but so also was the Organization of African Unity, both happening in 1963. This is a post-colonial African independence moment in Ethiopia. It's the first time that over 50 countries kind of get together and imagine their future as independent states. But yes, we have Martin Luther King preparing his speech for Washington. So yeah. So it's a case of providing a kind of different way of locating these historically visual, often visual moments. So the Human Rights, Human Wrongs project was about unlocking, if you like, the dominant kind of visual sense of what was important in time. So there's a kind of temporality game. I think there's a bit of a fantasy going on about access. I think we forget that, most people in Africa don't have access to the internet. I think when everybody's talking in these kind of conferences about photography being a democracy or the democratization of the photographic image, and everybody's on the internet, I kind of almost squirm in my seat when we talk about everybody. There is a majority world that doesn't have access to these tools. So there's a certain sense of kind of, what's the word, kind of cultural imperialism when we talk about who has access to what. So I think it's a very long time before the subaltern kind of space begins to impact on there's a north-south question in all this, about how developed the north is and how developed the south is. And of course, the north is in the south and the south is in the north. Black is not kind of, as I said in my talk, it's not an epidermal schema of things. I'm not interested in kind of black people in that moment. What I'm interested is kind of, I suppose, oppositional political kind of voices. And in the 80s, we were looking at this whole idea of what does it mean to identify with a kind of black perspective. So we used it, we kind of took the word a little bit to a place where it simply meant to work against something, if you like. it meant that you could identify with a kind of political perspective that was kind of other. Obviously, from 1988 to say 2008, the kind of political terrain of identity politics has shifted massively. So the movement, if you like, towards or the folding into the 3 R's, as I call them, race, rights, and representation, become a kind of envelope of which you can look at a black political perspective through. So the black thing becomes a prism of which you can diverse off into different spaces. The whole idea of power, the whole idea of who's looking at who's watching who and when, the whole kind of scopic nature of kind of who's in control of the device that kind of captures something. So I think there's a kind of sense of violence within there. And I'm not looking at violence in the sense that it's always about a violent moment. I'm looking at it as a point of authority. So I think it's kind of inherent within the medium itself that at the very moment that you decide to do something with that camera, with somebody else subject in that frame, then the potential for violence is enormous there. What you take, what you capture, where you locate it, what you say, what you happen, how you author it, the way that it moves in the world. The fact that violence, I would argue, is about disenfranchisement, of taking a voice away from somebody. That's photography's legacy, if you like. So many people have been authored by so few lenses. It's an incredible moment in history that I think we just might need to arrest.